I'm John Rofrano, Senior VAST Trainer here for Boris FX, and welcome to the Boris Continuum Complete for Final Cut Pro 10 training series. In this episode, we're going to take a look at BCC Extruded Text. Now, while you're watching this opening sequence, you might think that I used some sophisticated motion graphics tool to create it, but actually, all of it was created right in Final Cut Pro 10 using the BCC filters. The 3D text, the space background, the lens flares, everything, all done with BCC, and I'm going to show you how. I'm going to separate this tutorial into two episodes. In the first one, I want to spend a little time going over the features of extruded text so that you can understand how they work, and we'll just create the initial extruded text in the first episode. Then in the next episode, we'll animate the text and add the other background elements. So let's switch over to Final Cut Pro. This is the original project that I created, so I want to create a new one and start from scratch. You can see it's just two clips, one with the text and one with the background. So I'm going to go over and right-click in our event and say New Project. You could also press Command-N, and we'll call this Space Adventure. And I'm going to go over to the generators and go to the solids and just drag and drop a black solid on there. Now you could use any color you want because we're going to drop the solid out and make it transparent later, but I find it's just easier to work on black. It's asking me the video properties. I'm going to make this 720p because it'll work a little bit faster in 720p on my laptop. And then hit Shift-G just to make this the length of the project. Next, we'll go to our effects, and in BCC 3D Objects, we're going to drag and drop BCC Extruded Text. Now you'll notice there's extruded text with one material, extruded text with automation. These are just simpler versions of the full 3D extruded text. So I'm going to show you how to use the full 3D extruded text, and then you'll know how to use any of the others. We drop it on and we can see the text has appeared. Now as we open up BCC Extruded Text, you'll see there's a fair amount of parameters, and you might think, wow, this is kind of overwhelming. But really, it's laid out pretty logically, and I'm going to show you all the different sections. Now normally, I don't like to go over settings just for the sake of settings because I believe it's easier to learn them in context. But if I give you an overview, you'll be able to follow where I'm going as I show you things in context. So in the beginning, we just have the text and positioning and master scale, and then things like the tracking and leading, all things about text. There are some attributes about the extrusion and extrusion depth. And then we get to a section that you're going to see 4 of. So it's not really that many parameters. It's just that they're multiplied 4 times, one for each of the 4 sides that you might use. So this is all the attributes for the front texture, and then the same thing for the side texture. And you can change color, reflectivity, and shift the texture around. Same thing for the bevel texture, and then again for the back texture. So don't get overwhelmed by all of these attributes. They're just repeated 4 times. And then finally, there's a section on lighting where you have all of your 3D lighting, and you can have 3-point lighting, 1, 2, or 3 points of light. And then we have some added effects like jitter and motion blur and doing 3D ripple. And finally, enabling a drop shadow. So each one is kind of logically laid out. We're going to go back to the top and show you how we created this text sequence. I'm going to open up the text editor by clicking on this checkbox here, Edit Text. And that'll bring up a text dialog where I can put in my own text. So I'm going to put in Space Adventure. And then I'm going to select all of it and select a font. Now you can just go through the fonts that are on your computer. You want to select something that's kind of big and bold. I downloaded a font that I thought was kind of space-like, something you might see in a space movie. It's this font here, Nationalization, and you know that one kind of has a space feel to it to me, kind of a NASA feel to it. So if I just click Apply, it'll immediately update on the screen. But I wanted to have that space go across the same width as Adventure, and I want to snug these up a bit. So let me go and edit text again. I'm going to pick space and do a fill, justify, and reduce the tracking, and then apply and see what we got. There we go. So now space is coming all the way across, and I've snugged them up a bit. And I've got tracking in here so I can do even more tracking in the plugin itself. So now that we have the text that we want, let's take a closer look at how we can modify it. I'm going to take the master scale and bring it up a bit because I want to get you really close to this. In fact, Let me make this 100%. And then I'm going to rotate this maybe 15 and 60 to kind of give you an edge-on view of this. I think that's kind of good. So now we can get a good view of what's going on here as I show you the rest of this. So as you've seen, rotation X and Y will rotate the text in the X and Y direction. There's a little orbit cam so you could spin around the text. What I want to do here is go to the extrusion depth and make that a little bit bigger. The extrusion depth is 1.5, and I just want to move that out. As you can see, the extrusion depth is how far the text gets extruded. And I think maybe 5 is probably good. So I wanted to have a nice, good extrusion on here. The other thing we could do is change the bevel. It defaults to a straight bevel. Normally, I like to use this convex bevel, right, because it just kind of rounds the edges really nice. But because I actually want this to be kind of a metallic space theme, I think I'm going to use the regular straight. But let me also show you concave. So concave is going to cut out. So it's kind of look like wood edging, right? So if I was going to try to make something look like wood, I might use concave. I'm going to keep it on straight because I think straight looks better for my space theme. You can change the bevel amount. So if you want to make the bevel thicker, you can make the bevel thicker or thinner. I'm just going to keep it at, about 1.5 is good. Now, back bevels controls whether the bevel is happening in the back. I don't know if you can see, but there's no bevel in the back here. And so if I click on back bevels, now you can just see, and I'll turn this around. Let me go up and really show you. So I'm going to rotate this on the Y a bit. So now as we go around to the back, you can see there are no bevels on the back. And if I click back bevels, now I get bevels on the back. So normally they're turned off because if you don't turn your text around, there's no need to have these back bevels on. But if you, we are going to have the text rotate in 3D space, and so I'd like to have bevels all the way around. So that's your back bevels. The next set of controls has to do with how well it renders. So you can set your aliasing if you're noticing that it's really playing back slow while you're editing. You can put it in draft mode, and then you can put it in better mode when you want to render. There's an option to smooth the edges or not. So you can. These are things you could turn off to make it perform better while you're editing, and then turn them back on before rendering. And polygon count's really important because that's how many polygons are used to render. So let me bring this all the way down, and you can see how you got these straight lines here, because we got the polygon counts are really low. And then as I bring the polygon counts up, they start to smooth out. I think 24 is the default there, and I'll leave it at 24. So if you're ever working with text and it looks a little blocky, you could increase the polygon count. All right, let's move over to the material. So I'm going to go back to fit this onto the screen. And let me scroll up. I realized that I made the master scale really big. So I'll bring the master scale down a bit and get it all on the screen so you can see what's happening. And actually, I think I'm going to rotate it a bit less. Let me drop this to 80. Get the whole thing on the screen. Okay. So now I want to apply a texture to this. Now, if you've ever used BCC in Motion or in another host, you'll know that there is a set of presets that kind of help you out with applying textures and stuff. Those presets are not in Final Cut, but I figured a way on how to use the textures anyway, and I'm going to share that with you. So you'll notice I have a library here called Stock Media, and in that Stock Media, I have an event called Boris Effects Textures. And the textures are installed on your computer. Let me show you how to create this little library of textures from Boris. You go into your import, and then under your hard drive, whatever your Macintosh hard drive is, if you look under library, and then application support, and then go down to BCC Presets 9, and then scroll down to custom textures. That's where they are. I'm going to open it up just to show you. So there are the textures. So you click on the custom textures folder, you click on import selected, and what you get is this whole folder full of textures. So now you've got a nice media library with all of your textures you can apply. So let's go back and let's apply a texture. So I'm going to select my clip. We'll scroll down to material mapping. Now, remember I said these textures were in here 4 times, but there's 4 ways to map the materials. You can use one for everything. So front, back, sides, everything uses one texture. You can use the front and back to have a texture, and then the side and bevel to have a different texture or color. You can have the front and back be the same and have the sides different and the bevels different, or you can have front, back, sides, bevel, everything used different. So for this particular effect, I'm going to tell it to use the front and back have one, and the sides and the bevel to use another. So I'm going to click on my little image well here, and then I'm going to go up to my Boris Effects textures, and I'm going to find a texture that I like. And I believe the one I really liked was this Metal 3 texture. So I click on the Metal 3 texture, I click on Apply, and then that texture gets applied to the front. And let me go back to 100% view here so you can see a little bit better. You can see there's this nice brushed aluminum texture on the front of the letters. Now, how the sides get green? Well, let me select my clip again. So what happened there was I turned on sides and bevel having a separate texture, and they defaulted to whatever default color was there, which was green. So let's go make that the blue that I liked. Right, so now I have it so that the front is the brushed aluminum and the sides are blue. And if I wanted to make the bevels different, I could go up and change this again. So I can say that I want to have the front and back the same, but I want the bevels to be different. And then you'll notice the bevels already changed. I come down to the third one, and then maybe I want these bevels to be a little brighter color or a light blue, or you can make them any color you want. So it's nice that you can dynamically, scroll through the colors and see them change. And so maybe here we'll make them just a lighter blue. And that's with the bevels with a different color. And then if I change my mind, I can go back and just do front side bevels, and it gives me a totally different look. Now you can mix textures with the color. So even though I've used the texture, it doesn't have to be 100%. There's a texture string. So I can pick this, I could maybe put a blue color behind here and then bring the strength down, and you'll notice that the blue, see, is getting blended with the texture. So if I just wanted to give this texture a little blue tint right about there, right? So now it's kind of blending in better, right? I've got, it's the brush chrome, but the brush chrome has a little bit of a blue tint to it. And then I've got the blue on the sides, right? So all the stuff kind of blends in better. Let me bring this back to fit. And then I'll go down and just show you some of the last things that are in here before we wrap this up. Here I'm going down to the lights. One of the things I could have done, instead of doing blue on the texture, I could have changed one of the colors of the lights, because we do have 3-point lighting here. This is only one light. So that's one light source. This is 2 light sources. You can see the back is lighting up a bit, and then all 3 light sources, right? And you can change the colors of the lights. So here you can see where one is coming from by just going into the color selector. And we can look at where light 2 is affecting. So light 2 is coming off from the right there. You can see there's more color coming off on the right. So that's where light 2 is. And then light 3, I believe, is coming from the back. So now you see, here's some of that green coming up on the back there. So light 3 is in the back. So light 1's over here, light 2 is over here, and light 3 is in the back somewhere. So you can, again, change the way it looks by changing the lighting. Then there's some special effects that you can do. So there's a jitter, and we'll go into these in more depth in another tutorial. But here's a jitter amount, and I'll just play this, and you can see that they're going to start to jitter there on the screen as it plays back. So that's the jitter amount. We'll keep that down to 0 because we're not using jitter for this one. There's motion blur. If you were going to, and we are going to enable motion keyframing, then what we'll do is before we render, we'll turn on motion blur so that we get a nice blur to the motion that's happening in the text. And then enable ripple, does kind of a ripple deformer. And again, we'll just play that through. So there's kind of a ripple deformer. And these are all just default settings, and we'll go through that in another tutorial, how to work with the ripple deformer. And then finally a drop shadow that we can use. If we had a background that wasn't black, a drop shadow would probably be more exciting. Okay, so Let's go back and just take a look at the top parameters that I glossed over because I wanted to show you that at the end. I've got rotate here, and so if I click in, you can see that rotate is going to rotate, X is going to rotate on the X axis, right? And let me get this back to 0. And then rotate Y is going to rotate around the Y axis. And we're going to use these when we do the keyframing, which is why I didn't spend a lot of time on them. And then rotate Z is going to spin the whole thing around on the Z axis, which is coming out from the center. So there's rotate Z. And then for positions, you have the same thing here as position X, Y, and Z. We can open these up if it's easy for you to see. So position on the X would move it to the left and right. Position on the Y would move it up and down. And then position on the Z, which is down here below master scale. And let me put these back to where they were, which is 0.5 and 0.5, right in the middle. And then Z brings it closer or further away. And you can see a little phenomenon happening here. As it went beyond the light, it now becomes backlit, right? And that's going to be a nice little effect that we have when we push this thing forward in space. And so you can move it around all 3 axes. Then finally, there's this nice orbit cam, which I really like because it just orbits around the object. But you say, well, how is that different than just doing a rotation on the Y? Well, let's change this so that it's in another position, right? And now if I use the orbit cam, and as a matter of fact, let me tilt this a little bit more because it'll be a little more pronounced. Now if I use the rotate on the Y, you'll notice that it's rotating on the Y in object space, right? It's rotating on the Y based on the center of the text. But if you use the orbit cam, it actually orbits around the entire text. See how the whole thing is spinning? So it's really a camera spinning around the text, right? So independent of whatever the axis. So it's in world coordinates, spinning around the text, as opposed to rotation, which is always going to rotate in relation to the actual object itself. Okay, so let me reset these and we'll get ready for the next part. So that's all I wanted to cover for this episode. Hopefully you've got a good overview of how to use 3D text and create 3D text for your projects. In the next episode, we're going to animate this text and add some background elements to really make the space adventure come to life. If you have any questions, visit us at www.borisfx.com or follow us on Twitter or Facebook. Until next time, this is John Rofrano for Boris FX. Thanks for watching.